The gunshot that echoed through the valley wasn't meant to kill, just to warn, but it sent Eliza Ashford scrambling for cover behind a water trough as her heart pounded against her ribs. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life would turn out, hiding from her own brother-in-law on the outskirts of Ouray, Colorado, in the spring of 1885. "You ain't welcome here no more, Eliza." Frank Ashford's voice boomed across the small homestead. "A woman who can't give a man children ain't worth the salt in her bread." Eliza pressed her back against the rough wood of the trough, the cold mountain water seeping through her worn calico dress. At 26, she had expected to have a home filled with children by now. But after 7 years of marriage to Thomas Ashford, her womb remained empty. And now, with Thomas 6 months dead from pneumonia, his brother Frank had made it clear that a barren widow had no place on Ashford land. "I worked this land alongside Thomas for 7 years," she shouted back. "This homestead is as much mine as it was his." "The law says different," Frank snarled, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. "And even if it didn't, what good is a woman who can't bear children?" "You're worthless, Eliza. Always have been." The words stung worse than any physical blow. Eliza had heard them too many times, first whispered behind her back in church, then spoken openly by her mother-in-law, and finally from Thomas himself in the dark months before his death. "I'm giving you till sundown," Frank called out. "Take what you can carry and get out. Anything left behind belongs to me and my family now." Another shot rang out, this one splintering the edge of the trough just inches from Eliza's head. She bit back a scream, knowing Frank was just trying to frighten her. It was working. With trembling hands, she gathered her skirts and waited until she heard Frank's footsteps retreating toward the house, Thomas's house, the home they had built together. When she was sure he was gone, she darted toward the small stable where her 2 horses were kept. Within an hour, Eliza had loaded as many of her belongings as she could onto her mare, Penny. A few dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, and the small lockbox containing what little money she had managed to save over the years. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The sun was still high in the sky when Eliza mounted Penny, leading her other horse, a sturdy gelding named Buck, by the reins. She didn't wait for Frank's sundown deadline. There was nothing left for her here but pain and humiliation. As she rode away from the only home she'd known since her wedding day, Eliza couldn't hold back her tears, not just for the loss of her home, but for all she had endured. The whispers, the pitying glances, the growing coldness in her husband's eyes as month after month passed without the swell of her belly. Barren, they called her. Worthless. She had tried everything: prayers, tinctures from the local healer, even a trip to Denver to see a fancy doctor who poked and prodded and ultimately shrugged, saying some women simply weren't meant to bear children. Eliza rode west, away from the Ashford homestead, with no destination in mind. She just knew she needed to put distance between herself and the life that had slowly suffocated her. The snow-capped peaks of the San Juan Mountains loomed to the south, their majesty indifferent to her troubles. By nightfall, Eliza had traveled far enough that she felt safe making camp near a stream. As she sat by her small fire, the enormity of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone, with no home, no family, and no prospects. A barren woman in a land where a woman's worth was measured by the children she could produce. She cried until no more tears would come, then curled up in her thin blanket and fell into an exhausted sleep. Dawn brought with it a chill and a decision. Eliza would head to Silverton, a bustling mining town she'd visited once with Thomas. It was far enough away that news of her shame might not have reached there, yet close enough that she could make the journey in a few days. After 3 days of hard riding through rugged terrain, Eliza caught her first glimpse of Silverton. The town sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could make out the silhouettes of the buildings against the backdrop of the peaks. Eliza's arrival in Silverton drew curious glances. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one leading a pack horse loaded with belongings raised questions. She kept her head down as she made her way to the hotel, not wanting to meet anyone's gaze. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, eyed her suspiciously. "Rooms 50 cents a night, paid in advance," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't approve of a woman traveling alone. Eliza counted out the coins, painfully aware that every cent spent brought her closer to destitution. "Do you know of any work available in town?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The clerk snorted. "For a woman, laundry maybe, or the saloon's always looking for girls." Heat rushed to Eliza's cheeks at the implication. "I meant respectable work," she clarified. "I can cook, clean, so I kept books for my husband's farm." "You can try the general store," the clerk said with a shrug. "Old man Peterson's wife died last winter and he's been running the place alone." Eliza thanked him and took the key to her room. It was small and sparsely furnished, but clean. She sat on the edge of the bed, counting the money she had left. If she was frugal, it would last her a month, maybe a bit longer. She had to find work quickly. The next morning, Eliza dressed in her best, a blue calico dress that had faded at the seams but was still presentable, and made her way to Peterson's general store. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and an elderly man looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, madam?" he asked, squinting at her through thick eyeglasses. "I was hoping you might need some help in the store," Eliza said, summoning all her courage. "I'm new in town, looking for work." Mr. Peterson studied her for a long moment. "What's your name, Mrs.?" "Eliza Ashford," she replied, her wedding ring feeling suddenly heavy on her finger. "Widow?" he asked, his expression softening slightly when she nodded. "Sorry for your loss. Not sure I can afford help right now, but I'll keep you in mind." Eliza's heart sank, but she thanked him and continued her search. The laundry was already fully staffed, as was the hotel. The saloon owner offered her a job as a serving girl, but Eliza declined, not yet desperate enough to work in a place where men's hands wandered freely. By week's end, Eliza was growing desperate. Her funds were dwindling, and the hotel clerk had made it clear that she couldn't stay without paying. That night, she sat in her room, contemplating selling one of her horses when a knock came at her door. It was Mr. Peterson. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been thinking about your offer," he said. "My arthritis has been acting up something fierce, and I could use help with the inventory and stocking shelves. Can't pay much, but I can offer room and board above the store if you're interested." Relief washed over Eliza. "I'd be most grateful, Mr. Peterson." The room above the store was larger than her hotel room and came with a small kitchen. Mr. Peterson explained that it was where he and his wife had lived for 30 years before they'd built a proper house on the edge of town. Now, with his wife gone, he preferred to stay in the house with all her things around him. Eliza settled into her new life with a determination born of necessity. She worked hard in the store, reorganizing shelves, keeping meticulous inventory, and serving customers with a smile regardless of how she felt inside. Mr. Peterson was fair, if not generous, and the arrangement allowed her to save what little he paid her. Weeks turned into months, and Eliza found a routine in Silverton. She made a few acquaintances, mostly other shopkeepers, but kept to herself. The last thing she wanted was to form attachments, only to have people turn on her when they discovered her secret shame. It was a quiet afternoon in late summer when the stranger walked into the store. Eliza was behind the counter, tallying the day's sales, when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see a tall man in dusty clothes, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal a shock of sandy hair and the most startling blue eyes Eliza had ever seen. "I'm looking for Mr. Peterson. He's resting at home today," Eliza replied, trying not to stare. "His arthritis is acting up. I'm Mrs. Ashford." "Can I help you with something?" The man approached the counter, extending his hand. "Yates Harrington. I've got a delivery for Mr. Peterson. Ordered some specialty items from Denver." Eliza shook his hand briefly, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "I can accept the delivery for him, Mr. Harrington." "Call me Yates, please," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Mr. Harrington was my father, and he was a much more respectable man than I'll ever be." There was something in his easy manner that made Eliza smile despite herself. "Very well, Yates. Where's this delivery?" "Got it loaded on my wagon outside. It's a heavy order, crates of canned goods, flour, sugar, and such. I'll need a hand bringing it in." "I can help," Eliza offered, coming around the counter. Yates raised an eyebrow. "That's mighty kind, madam, but some of these crates weigh more than you do, I'd wager." "I'm stronger than I look," Eliza insisted, following him outside. The wagon was indeed loaded with crates and barrels. Yates hopped up and handed down the lighter items to Eliza, who carried them into the store. When it came to the heavier crates, he insisted on carrying them himself, his muscles straining beneath his shirt. As they worked, Eliza learned that Yates ran a freight business, transporting goods between the mining towns and larger cities like Denver. He'd been doing it for 5 years, ever since he'd left ranching behind. "Ranching's a hard life," he explained as they unloaded the last crate. "Drought took my family's place near Durango. Figured hauling goods was steadier work." "It must be lonely," Eliza commented, "being on the road so much." Yates shrugged. "Got used to it. Besides, I meet interesting people." He glanced at her with that disarming smile again. "Like today." Eliza felt a blush creep into her cheeks and quickly changed the subject. "How much does Mr. Peterson owe you for the delivery?" They settled the business transaction, and Eliza expected Yates to be on his way. Instead, he lingered, browsing the shelves with apparent interest. "Anything else I can help you with?" she asked. "Actually, I was wondering if you might recommend a place to get a decent meal in town," he said. "I'll be staying overnight before heading back to Denver." "The hotel restaurant is quite good," Eliza suggested. "Or there's Mrs. Calloway's boarding house. She serves meals to non-boarders for a small fee." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you'd like to join me, as a thank you for your help with the unloading." The invitation caught Eliza off guard. She hadn't dined with a man since Thomas's death, and the idea made her unexpectedly nervous. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. Just a meal between new acquaintances," Yates assured her, seeming to sense her discomfort. "No obligation beyond that." Something about his straightforward manner put her at ease. "Very well," she found herself saying. "Mrs. Calloway's at 6 o'clock." His smile widened. "I'll be there." After Yates left, Eliza tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to his invitation. She told herself it was nothing, just a friendly meal with a man passing through town. Yet, she couldn't help the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. At 5:30, Eliza closed the store and hurried upstairs to freshen up. She changed into her best dress, a deep green that Thomas had always said brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, and pinned her brown hair into a neat bun. She pinched her cheeks for color and dabbed a bit of rose water behind her ears, then immediately felt foolish for doing so. Mrs. Calloway's boarding house was a short walk from the store. Eliza arrived precisely at 6, her heart racing inexplicably. Yates was already there, cleaned up from his day's work, his hair still damp from washing. He stood when he saw her, pulling out a chair at the small table he'd secured. "You look lovely, Mrs. Ashford," he said as she sat down. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirts. "And please call me Eliza." Dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green beans, followed by apple pie. Throughout the meal, Yates kept the conversation flowing easily, telling stories of his travels and the characters he'd met along the way. Eliza found herself laughing more than she had in years. "So, Eliza," Yates said as they finished their pie, "what brought you to Silverton? You mentioned you're a Mrs., but I don't see a Mr. Ashford around." The question sobered her immediately. "My husband died last winter," she said, her voice quiet. "Pneumonia." "I'm sorry for your loss," Yates said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Thank you." Eliza took a sip of water, debating how much to share. "After he passed, there was nothing for me where we lived. I came to Silverton for a fresh start." Yates seemed to sense there was more to the story but didn't press. "Fresh starts are good," he said instead. "I've had a few myself." As the evening drew to a close, Yates walked Eliza back to the store. The night was cool, stars twinkling overhead in a clear sky. "Thank you for joining me for dinner," Yates said as they reached the store's entrance. "Made for a much pleasanter evening than eating alone." "I enjoyed it as well," Eliza admitted. "Safe travels tomorrow." "Actually," Yates said, "I'll be in town another day or two, got some business with the mining company. Maybe I could stop by the store again." The prospect shouldn't have pleased her as much as it did. "I'd like that," she said softly. Yates tipped his hat. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night, Yates." True to his word, Yates appeared at the store the next afternoon, this time with no pretense of business. He simply wanted to see her. They talked as Eliza worked, and he even helped her rearrange some of the heavier items on the high shelves. The day after that, he invited her for a walk along the river after she closed the store. It was improper for a widow to be seen walking with a man so soon after her husband's death, but Silverton wasn't our A, and no one here knew her history. For the first time in years, Eliza felt a lightness in her spirit. On the third day, Yates announced he had to return to Denver the following morning. "I've got deliveries scheduled that can't wait," he explained as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. "But I'll be back this way in about 2 weeks." "Your customers will be waiting," Eliza said, trying to hide her disappointment. Yates turned to face her, his expression serious. "And will you be waiting, Eliza?" The directness of the question startled her. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," he said gently. "I've enjoyed these past few days more than any in recent memory. I'd like to see you again when I return." Eliza's heart raced. "Yates, there are things about me you don't know." "I reckon there's a lot we don't know about each other yet," he agreed, "but I'd like the chance to learn." She looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. "I'm not sure that would be wise." "Why not?" When she didn't answer, he continued, "Eliza, I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see where this might go." The sensible part of Eliza knew she should discourage him. What future could there be with a man who would eventually learn her shame? But the part of her that had been lonely for so long, that yearned for connection, won out. "I'll be here," she said softly. The smile that lit his face warmed her to her core. "Then I'll definitely be back." The 2 weeks after Yates left were the longest of Eliza's life. She threw herself into her work, reorganizing the entire store and taking inventory twice. Mr. Peterson noticed her distraction but said nothing. though his knowing smile suggested he understood more than she realized. Exactly 14 days after he left, the bell above the store door jingled and Yates walked in. Eliza's heart leapt at the sight of him, sunburned from the trail but grinning from ear to ear. "Told you I'd be back," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Over the next several months, a pattern emerged. Yates would come to Silverton every 2 to 3 weeks, staying for a few days each time. During his visits, he and Eliza were inseparable. They picnicked by the river, attended the occasional town social, and spent long evenings talking on the porch behind the store. Eliza learned that Yates was 31, had grown up on a cattle ranch, and had an older sister living in California. He'd never married, though he'd been engaged once to a girl who'd ultimately chosen a banker over a cowboy turned freighter. In turn, she told him about growing up in Missouri, moving west with her parents as a child, and meeting Thomas when she was 18. She spoke of her life on the Ashford homestead, though she carefully avoided mentioning her inability to have children. As autumn turned to winter, Eliza knew she was falling in love with Yates. The realization terrified her. Sooner or later, he would learn her secret, and the look in his eyes would change from admiration to disappointment, just as Thomas's had. The first heavy snow came in early December, making mountain travel treacherous. Yates had planned to leave for Denver, but the storm forced him to delay his departure. "Looks like you're stuck with me a few more days," he told Eliza as they watched the snow fall from the window of her rooms above the store. "What a hardship," she teased, though secretly she was delighted. On the third night of the storm, they sat before the small fireplace in Eliza's sitting room, a pot of coffee between them. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside it was warm and cozy. "I've been thinking," Yates said suddenly, "about my route." "Oh." Eliza looked up from her knitting. "It makes more sense to base my operations out of Silverton rather than Denver," he continued. "Most of my business is with the mining towns in these parts anyway." Eliza's pulse quickened. "You're thinking of moving to Silverton?" "If there was a reason to stay," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. She set her knitting aside, her hands trembling slightly. "Yates." In 2 strides he was beside her on the small sofa, taking her hands in his. "Eliza, I've fallen in love with you," he said, his voice husky. "I think about you every moment we're apart. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Eliza's eyes. "You don't know what you're asking," she whispered. "I'm asking you to marry me," Yates said simply. Eliza pulled her hands away, rising to her feet. "You can't. You don't understand." Yates stood as well, confusion clear on his face. "Then help me understand." "I can't have children," Eliza blurted out, the words tumbling forth after being held back for so long. "I'm barren. I tried for 7 years with Thomas, and there was nothing wrong with him. It's me. I'm broken." She expected him to step back, to look at her with the same disappointment she'd seen in Thomas's eyes. Instead, Yates moved closer. "Is that all?" he asked quietly. Eliza stared at him in disbelief. "Is that all? Yates, a woman who can't bear children is worthless. Who told you that?" His voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of anger. "Thomas, his family, everyone," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "It's just the way things are. A woman's purpose is to bear children." Yates reached out, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "That's nonsense, Eliza. A woman's purpose, a man's purpose, is to live, to love, to make the world better in whatever way they can. But don't you want children?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "I want you," Yates said firmly. "If children come, they come. If not, then it's just you and me, and that's more than enough for me. You're priceless, Eliza, just as you are." The words, so different from those she'd heard for years, broke something open inside Eliza. She sobbed, and Yates gathered her into his arms, holding her as years of pain and shame poured out of her. When her tears finally subsided, Yates tipped her chin up to look at him. "I love you, Eliza Ashford. Children or no children, I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Looking up into his earnest blue eyes, Eliza found the courage to believe him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church in Silverton. Mr. Peterson gave Eliza away, beaming with pride like a father. The entire town turned out for the celebration, having embraced the romance between the quiet widow and the charming freighter. Yates had bought a small house on the edge of town, using his savings and a loan from the bank. It wasn't grand, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room, but to Eliza, it was a palace. On their wedding night, as snow fell softly outside their bedroom window, Yates held Eliza close. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there are a lot of children in this world who need homes. Orphans from the war, from sickness, from hard luck. If you wanted, someday we could open our home to 1 or 2. Eliza looked up at him in wonder. "You'd want to do that?" "I want whatever makes you happy," Yates replied. "And I think you'd make a wonderful mother, whether the child came from your body or not." The idea took root in Eliza's heart, growing alongside her love for Yates. For the first time in years, she began to imagine a future that wasn't defined by what she lacked, but by what she had to give. Spring came to Silverton, melting the snow and bringing new life to the mountains. Yates had established his freight business in town, hiring a young man named Charlie to help with the deliveries. This allowed him to spend more time at home with Eliza, who continued to work at the general store, now as a partner rather than an employee after Mr. Peterson decided to semi-retire. It was a warm day in May when Dr. Bennett, the town physician, confirmed what Eliza had begun to suspect but had been afraid to hope for. She was expecting a child. "Are you certain?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor, a kindly older man with silver hair, nodded. "All the signs are there, Mrs. Harrington. I'd estimate you're about 2 months along." Eliza left the doctor's office in a daze, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. A miracle, after all the years of trying and failing. She wondered if perhaps the doctors had been wrong, or if the change in her circumstances, the absence of the stress and shame she'd lived with for so long, had somehow made a difference. She waited until that evening to tell Yates, after they'd finished dinner and were sitting on their small front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "I saw Dr. Bennett today," she began, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and lingering fear. Yates turned to her, concern immediately etching his features. "Are you unwell?" "No," Eliza said, a smile breaking through her nervousness. "Quite the opposite. Yates, we're going to have a baby." For a moment, Yates simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a whoop of joy that probably echoed through the entire valley, he lifted her from her chair and spun her around, heedless of the neighbors who might see. "A baby," he exclaimed, setting her carefully back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Eliza, that's wonderful news." "Are you happy?" The question, so considerate of her feelings even in his own joy, made her love him all the more. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "After all this time, to think that we could." "Hey," Yates said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Whatever happens, we're in this together. And remember what I said, you're priceless just as you are. This baby is a blessing, but you were already my whole world." The pregnancy progressed without complications, much to Eliza's relief and amazement. As her belly grew, so did her confidence. The whispers that had followed her in our ray were absent in Silverton. replaced by genuine congratulations and gifts from neighbors and customers. Yates was attentive to the point of hovering, which amused and occasionally exasperated Eliza. He insisted on hiring a girl from town to help at the store so Eliza could rest more, and he limited his freight runs to shorter distances, unwilling to be away for more than a day or two at a time. "You're going to spoil me," Eliza protested one evening as Yates massaged her swollen feet. "That's the plan," he replied with a grin. "Get used to it." The baby arrived on a crisp November morning after a relatively short labor. Eliza gripped Yates's hand so tightly she was sure she'd break his fingers, but he never complained, murmuring encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. "It's a boy," Dr. Bennett announced as the baby's lusty cries filled the room. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Eliza's face as the doctor placed the squalling infant on her chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and the most perfect little face she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered, overwhelmed by the love that surged through her. "We've been waiting for you." Yates leaned down, his own cheeks wet with tears, and kissed her forehead. "You did it, Eliza. Look at him. He's perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Harrington Samuel after Yates's father, and Thomas in memory of Eliza's first husband, a gesture of forgiveness and closure that felt right to them both. Life settled into a new rhythm with baby Samuel at its center. Eliza reduced her hours at the store, bringing the baby with her when she did work. Mr. Peterson, now officially Grandpa Pete to Samuel, was utterly besotted with the child and could often be found rocking him while Eliza tended to customers. Yates expanded his freight business, hiring another driver to handle the Denver route while he focused on the local deliveries. The arrangement allowed him to be home most nights, something he insisted was non-negotiable now that he had a family. As Samuel grew from a newborn to a sturdy toddler, Eliza occasionally thought about Frank Ashford and the cruel words he had hurled at her that day on the homestead. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted driving her away. Mostly, though, she was grateful. If Frank hadn't forced her to leave, she might never have found her way to Silverton, never have met Yates, never have discovered that her worth wasn't determined by her ability to bear children, though that gift had ultimately been granted to her as well. Samuel was nearly 2 when Eliza realized she was expecting again. This time, the fear that had shadowed her first pregnancy was absent, replaced by quiet confidence and joy. Yates was ecstatic, lifting Samuel high in the air as he told him he was going to be a big brother. Their daughter, Emma Rose, arrived in the summer of 1889, a dainty counterpoint to her boisterous brother. Where Samuel had Yates's blue eyes and outgoing nature, Emma inherited Eliza's hazel eyes and thoughtful disposition. "Two miracles," Eliza murmured one night as she nursed Emma while Yates read a bedtime story to Samuel in the next room. Life wasn't perfect. There were financial worries when a harsh winter limited Yates's freight runs. A terrifying week when Samuel developed a high fever that had them fearing the worst, and the normal challenges of building a life together. But through it all, Eliza never forgot how close she had come to missing this happiness, how easily she might have accepted the judgment that she was worthless. 5 years after their wedding, Yates was offered a substantial contract to supply several mining operations throughout the region. The opportunity would mean financial security for their family, but would require a larger operation. "I'm thinking of taking on a partner," Yates told Eliza as they discussed the opportunity. "Someone with experience in the business side of things." Eliza looked up from the ledger where she was calculating their household expenses. "Do you have someone in mind?" "You," Yates said simply. "Me." Eliza was surprised. "But I know nothing about freight contracts." "You know more than you think," Yates countered. "You've been handling the books for the store for years. You understand margins and inventory. Besides, there's no one I trust more." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. As the children grew older, Samuel, now 5, and Emma, 3, Eliza had found herself with more time and energy. She loved working at the store, but the idea of building something with Yates, of being true partners in business as well as in life, appealed to her. "Harrington and Harrington Freight Company," she mused. "It has a nice ring to it." Yates grinned. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Eliza confirmed. "Though Mr. Peterson will be devastated to lose me at the store." "He'll survive," Yates said, pulling her into his arms. "Especially since he gets to keep the children during the day. You know, he spoils them terribly." The transition wasn't seamless. There were arguments about business decisions, moments of doubt, and the challenge of balancing work and family. But within a year, Harrington and Harrington was thriving with 4 wagons, 6 employees, and contracts throughout western Colorado. Eliza thrived in her new role, discovering an aptitude for negotiation and organization that surprised even her. Yates often joked that he should have made her a partner from the beginning, given how quickly she mastered the business. "I always knew you were remarkable," he told her one evening as they reviewed the quarterly accounts, showing a profit that exceeded their expectations. "From the first moment I saw you in that store, even though I was a widow with a mysterious past," Eliza teased. "Especially because of that," Yates replied, his expression growing serious. "You had this determination, like you'd been through hell but refused to let it break you." Eliza reached across the table to take his hand. "I was broken, though. You helped me put the pieces back together." "No," Yates shook his head. "You were never broken, Eliza. Wounded, maybe, convinced of your own worthlessness because of what others had told you, but never broken." In the quiet moments when their home was still and the children were asleep, Eliza sometimes marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate widow fleeing her brother-in-law's cruelty to a successful businesswoman with a loving husband and 2 beautiful children. It seemed almost like a dream, except for the very real joy she felt each day. The year 1893 brought challenges to Silverton, as it did to many mining towns across the West. The repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act sent silver prices plummeting, and mines began to close, leaving men unemployed and businesses struggling. Harrington and Harrington was not immune to the downturn, with mining contracts canceled and the need for freight services drastically reduced. "We might have to let Charlie and the others go," Yates said grimly one night as they faced the harsh realities of their financial situation. "I can handle the few runs we have left myself." "No," Eliza said firmly. "These men have families. We'll find another way." They diversified, shifting from mining supplies to consumer goods. Eliza negotiated contracts with merchants in Denver and even as far away as St. Louis, bringing in products that were still in demand despite the economic hardship. They reduced prices, extended credit to longtime customers, and worked longer hours themselves to avoid laying off their employees. It was a precarious time, with more than one night spent worrying over how they would meet their obligations. But they weathered the storm together, their partnership stronger for having faced adversity and survived. As the economy slowly recovered, Eliza and Yates were approached by a representative from the newly established Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. The railroad was expanding its presence in the region and was interested in purchasing their freight company to serve as a local distribution partner. The offer was generous enough to secure their family's financial future and provide opportunities for their children that Eliza and Yates had never dreamed of for themselves. "What do you think?" Yates asked after the railroad man had left. "It would mean a big change." Eliza considered the question carefully. "We've built something special, haven't we?" "We have," Yates agreed. "But maybe it's time for something new. The children are growing up. Samuel's already talking about wanting to go to university someday." The idea of their son attending university, something neither Eliza nor Yates had experienced, filled Eliza with pride. Emma, too, was showing an aptitude for learning that suggested she might benefit from educational opportunities beyond what Silverton could offer. "We could move to Denver," Eliza suggested, "or even back east, give the children the best education possible." Yates looked thoughtful. "Would you be happy leaving Silverton? This has been our home for a long time." Eliza glanced around their kitchen, where so many family meals and important discussions had taken place. "Home is wherever we're together," she said simply. "Besides, we could always come back. Maybe buy that piece of land up by the river you've had your eye on, build a summer house there." The decision wasn't made lightly, but in the end, they accepted the railroad's offer. The sale was completed in the spring of 1895. A decade after Eliza had first arrived in Silverton, alone and afraid. Their farewell to the town was bittersweet. Mr. Peterson, now quite elderly but still sharp of mind, wept openly as he hugged Eliza and the children. The employees of Harrington and Harrington, all of whom were being retained by the railroad with improved wages, organized a farewell dinner that seemed to include half the town. "You changed this place," Charlie told Eliza as the celebration wound down. "Both of you showed us all what it means to face hard times with dignity and kindness." Eliza was touched by his words and by the many similar sentiments expressed throughout the evening. She had come to Silverton seeking anonymity and a chance to rebuild her life in peace. She was leaving as a respected businesswoman, a beloved friend and neighbor, and a woman who knew her own worth. Denver was a shock after the small-town life of Silverton. The streets were crowded, the buildings taller, the pace of life faster. But the city also offered opportunities they had only dreamed of in Silverton. The children enrolled in excellent schools. Yates found fulfilling work as a consultant for the railroad, and Eliza discovered a passion for social reform, particularly causes related to widows and orphan children. "You know," Yates said one evening as they sat in the parlor of their comfortable Denver home, Samuel practicing piano in the corner while Emma read by the fire, "I've been thinking about what you said years ago, about taking in children who need homes." Eliza looked up from her needlework, surprised. "You remember that, of course." Yates set aside his newspaper. "There's an orphanage on the other side of the city that's overflowing since the economic troubles. They're looking for families willing to foster children, maybe even adopt." The idea rekindled something in Eliza's heart. "Do you think we could, at our age?" She was nearing 40, Yates a few years older. "I think we have love to give and a home to share," Yates said simply. "Age is just a number." The next day they visited the orphanage together. The conditions were clean but austere, with too many children and too few staff. The director, a harried-looking woman named Mrs. Perkins, seemed skeptical of their interest until Eliza explained her own history. "I was told I was worthless because I couldn't have children," she said quietly. "Then I was blessed with 2 of my own. Now I think perhaps we were meant to open our home to children who need one as well." Mrs. Perkins's expression softened. "We have so many in need of good homes, especially the older ones. Everyone wants babies, but the children over 5 are often overlooked." As if on cue, a girl of about 7 peeked around the doorframe, her dark hair falling in tangled curls around a thin face. When she saw the adults looking at her, she ducked back out of sight. "That's Margaret," Mrs. Perkins said with a sigh. "She's been with us for nearly a year now. Her mother died in childbirth with her baby brother and her father. Well, he couldn't cope, brought them both here and never returned." "She has a brother?" Eliza asked, her heart already going out to the girl. Mrs. Perkins nodded. "William, he's 2 now, sweet little boy but sickly. The 2 are inseparable. Margaret won't let anyone else care for him if she can help it." Eliza and Yates exchanged a look, a silent communication born of years together. "Could we meet them?" Yates asked. Margaret was wary at first, standing protectively beside the crib where her brother napped. She answered Eliza and Yates's gentle questions in monosyllables, her eyes constantly darting to William as if afraid he might disappear. "Your brother is very lucky to have you looking after him," Eliza said softly. Margaret's chin jutted out defiantly. "Nobody else will. They say he's too much trouble 'cause he gets sick a lot." "My son Samuel was sickly as a toddler," Eliza told her. "It was frightening, but he grew stronger. Sometimes children just need time and care." "You have other children?" Margaret asked, the first sign of interest she'd shown. "Yes, Samuel is 10 now and Emma is 8, Yates replied. "They've been hoping for more siblings." Margaret's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "People only want babies. Nobody wants big kids like me." "We do," Eliza said firmly. "We want children who need homes regardless of their age. And we would never separate you from your brother." The girl's expression flickered between hope and disbelief. "Really? Really?" Yates confirmed. "We have a big house with plenty of room, and I bet you're a good reader, aren't you? Our Emma loves books. She'd be thrilled to have someone to share them with." For the first time, Margaret smiled, a tentative upturning of her lips that transformed her face. "I can read. Mrs. Perkins taught me." The process wasn't immediate. There were home visits, paperwork, and careful introductions between Margaret, William, and the Harrington children. Samuel was immediately protective of the younger boy, while Emma and Margaret circled each other cautiously before discovering a shared love of adventure stories. By Christmas of 1895, the Harrington household had expanded to include Margaret and William, first as foster children and then, as the bonds between them all grew stronger, as permanent members of the family through adoption. Life settled into a new pattern. William's health improved with consistent care and a doctor who specialized in childhood ailments. Margaret blossomed under the affection and stability of her new family, her initial wariness giving way to a natural exuberance that had been suppressed by grief and uncertainty. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Eliza sometimes reflected on the strange and winding path her life had taken. From a young bride filled with hopes of a house full of children, to a barren wife facing scorn and rejection, to a widow starting anew, to a wife and mother of 4, to a respected voice in Denver's charitable circles advocating for widows and orphans. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their summer home near Silverton, watching their grandchildren, Samuel's twins and Emma's daughter, playing in the twilight. Eliza smiled, reaching for his hand. Though they were both in their 50s now, with silver threading their hair and lines etched around their eyes, the connection between them remained as strong as ever. "I was thinking about the words you said to me all those years ago," she replied. "You're priceless just as you are. I didn't believe you then. I couldn't. But you showed me day after day, year after year, that my worth wasn't in what I could or couldn't do, but in who I was." Yates brought her hand to his lips. "And who you are, Eliza Harrington, is the most remarkable woman I've ever known." Mother to our children, both born to us and chosen by us, grandmother to these little terrors. He nodded toward the playing children. Businesswoman, advocate, and the love of my life. Eliza leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. Not bad for a woman who was once called barren and worthless, she mused. Those people, Yates said with the righteous indignation he still felt on her behalf after all these years, didn't deserve to know you. Eliza laughed softly. Perhaps not. But their cruelty led me to you, so I can't regret it entirely. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eliza watched her family, the family she had once been told she could never have, and felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. She had traveled from worthless to priceless, from barren to abundantly blessed, not because her circumstances had changed, but because she had finally learned to see herself through eyes of love. In the gentle clasp of Yates's hand, in the laughter of their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together against all odds, Eliza found the answer to a question she had stopped asking long ago. What was a woman's true worth? It was not in her ability to bear children or fulfill societal expectations. It was in her capacity to love, to persevere, to create family in whatever form it took. It was in her courage to believe she deserved happiness, even when the world told her otherwise. As twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared overhead, Eliza whispered a silent thank you to the young widow who had ridden away from our Ray all those years ago. Too hurt and angry to see that she was riding toward a future brighter than she could have imagined. A future where she was valued not for what she could give, but simply for who she was, priceless, just as she was.